Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet. Welcome back, Father.
Well, Colleen, as always, a great blessing to be with you.
It's wonderful to have you here in the studio with us.
Yep, and not in the mission field, but so it's good to catch me in between the missions, and so it's always a joy just to talk about these issues and help our audience to understand not only what we're doing in the mission field, but also just how do we live a culture of life? How do we live this beautiful culture that the church and God is asking us to live?
Exactly. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast, is being able to find that intersection between the life and family issues and how to live a culture of life here, and also informing people about what's going on in our mission field. So do you have any fun upcoming missions you're going on?
Well, the rest of this year is going to be pretty interesting because it's I start off by heading toward Mexico just in a few days, and that is to meet with many of the directors of the centers that help women all over Latin America. So it's their gathering, and I'm participating in that gathering. So I'm looking forward to it, just to be with people that that are fighting the good fight, and really making visible the gospel of life, and helping women in need, and walking with families, and just a beautiful experience. And it's just great to hear their stories and also their joy when they pull together. There's a common bond, and it's just exciting to be in that room. There's an energy, so I'm looking forward to that. And then following that, we have our 30th anniversary of HLI's work in English-speaking Africa, and that'll be in Tanzania. And then from there, I'm off to a mission to New Zealand, and from New Zealand, it's back to India, Philippines, and so quite a few domestic events happening in between those events. So, So I just ask the audience and our listeners just to pray for me, but just to pray for the success of all of this that's happening, not just with me, but with all of our affiliates and directors around the world.
Yeah, definitely. Do you happen to know, for the pregnancy care centers in Mexico, because that's what you said, what gathering you're going to, what's going on there with abortion being legal there now? Do you happen to know what the state of that is?
So it just depends, of course, what country we're speaking of. So when we're speaking of Mexico, we know that abortion is legal in the federal state. And as of recent, because of the Supreme Court, we've seen, sadly, more of the stretching, if you will, moving outside of the federal state into other regions of Mexico. But if you start moving into South America itself, you begin to realize that many countries are sadly embracing abortion, starting off as they always do, with an earlier period, rape, incest. But we're also seeing in some countries where abortion is being pushed back. So, and people trying to force it upon them, they're fighting against it. And so that's exciting to see. But what I love about the Centers for the Help of Women and many of our pregnancy care centers throughout the world is, despite what the government's doing, what law is happening, they're there fighting a good fight. I mean, they're standing in the midst of that difficulty, or if there happen to be a place where life is defended, a blessing, they're there. They're there to serve. They're there to care. They're there to walk, accompany, and sometimes they're the silent witnesses. No one hears about them, and really knows that they're even there. I was on the phone earlier today with one of the centers here in the Metro D.C. area in Maryland, and that serves there, in a beautiful apostolic work pregnancy care center, and just listening to they're seeing an increase. Sadly, and coming from Maryland, coming from D.C., Virginia, and so many people don't even know that these beautiful apostolic ministries are happening, but they're there, and sometimes closer to their communities than they think. And so I encourage people to become more familiar, with these centers, because this is where we should be. We should be in the conversation, not only speaking to the issues, why they're immoral, why abortion should not be ever an answer, and so how are we there to assist women in need? What are we doing to be present for them, and not just for that moment, of course, but throughout the journey that they need, whatever that need is. And that's what these beautiful groups are doing, and I'm very proud of them. And I see this around the world, and we can do a whole program just on that very easily.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, you see it around the world. That's exactly what our pregnancy care centers that we run try to do, where they don't it's not just pro-birth, it's pro-life in a sense. People say that, meaning that they're walking with the woman all the way through. They're helping her after she has a child to get the money she needs, getting her a sewing machine so she can sew clothes, doing all of that, like doing the legwork to help these women be able to actually take care of themselves and their children. So.
Because we know that in each of these cases, by majority, they feel alone, abandoned, don't know where to go. circumstances that have brought them into the situation now has changed, and they're alone. They're scared, and so how to be present. And of course, in many cases, they don't hear. So unless unfortunately, like here in the States, you won't see ads on TV. You're not going to see, you'll see billboards, maybe you'll see ads on the computer, but many people don't even know they exist. And I would venture to state that throughout the United States, there are pregnancy care centers in neighborhoods where people don't know they even exist. And that's why we need people to be be the advertisement, so people in the communities that know about them, make sure they're known. In our parishes, in our faith communities, in our neighborhoods, it's important for us to get the word out that that people are there, and it's not just for Catholics. We're serving life, and so it's important that people realize there are Catholic pregnancy care centers out there working. There's Christian pregnancy care centers. I know many other centers out there working on different levels, but all of them are there to walk in a company, and really it's kind of the best kept secret, and it should not be kept secret. So we need to put it out there and help them by getting advertisement, TV ads, or even, like I said, billboards around. Let people know. Recently, I just saw an ad campaign for the Sacred Heart all over the country. So this is another way we can do that by using that space, or helping them by paying for the ads to happen, or helping them by contributing to their internet service, whatever it is to help them to become known.
And we're actually raising money right now to purchase TV and radio time broadcasts around the world to promote, also just talking about the dangers of abortion, but also promote our pregnancy care centers. So, I mean, you've seen that. That's our recent the appeal that we're in the middle of right now, is trying to raise that money. So definitely, I'll put a link in the description. So check that out if you'd like to donate. And you're right now until July 31st, there's a matching gift. So your gift will be doubled if you give to us.
Exactly.
So
very good. That's
Father,
excellent.
I wasn't even planning on mentioning this, but you transitioned to this perfectly. So,
absolutely.
Little pitch for the campaign we're in right now.
Amen.
So,
Amen. And
get the word out there.
And this is what it is. I mean, this is, again, what our Holy Father has been, so beautifully talking about in the sense of accompaniment, walking with, standing with. What we say in the gospel is the Samaritan, who stops. There's a person in need. And that's why I think it's beautiful that today we're beginning our program by speaking about a true act of charity, of love, of care, of compassion, and of companionship. Walking with someone and being there through the moment and after the moment, and that's what these centers. And I've been involved with them for many, many years, even before coming to HLI. So as you can tell, I could be a billboard myself for them because I just believe in them, and I've seen the fruit of them, and I love to see them grow, not only in HLI's apostolic ministry around the world, but throughout our own country. And they are growing; they are multiplying. And it's also because our bishops have asked for this, walking with women in need. It's a great program that they themselves, as a bishops' conference, has called upon the church in the United States. Respond, and it's, someone said, well, it was in response to the anticipation of Dobbs. That is partly true, but it's also the shepherds of the church calling the church to stand in witness, to stand in solidarity, to exercise our Catholic principles. So it's a universal call, because it's the gospel. But it's great to hear our shepherds here reminding us, there's a need, stand.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Father. And then today we're going to be talking about godparents and basically what they are, why they're important, why we need them, why the church asks us to have them, and then what qualities you should be looking for if you're looking for a godparent for your child, or things you can do if you are a godparent. So I guess we'll just start with, why don't you share, you knew your godparents really well, your godmother especially. I've heard you talk about her a lot. Could you just tell your story of your relationship with her first, and then we can transition into what the church actually teaches about this position?
Sure. Well, I think it's a great segue, because of what we've been talking about, standing in witness, to really make visible, to manifest what one's faith really calls us to live. And so when speaking about the role of a godmother, a godfather, what the church is asking of this individual is to stand in solidarity with the parents of the child and to accompany the child through life. And how that accompaniment occurs comes in many ways. So you made reference to my godmother. So I knew my godmother until I was about 11, almost 12 years old.
Mhm.
And so my godfather died when I was 3. So I have I do have a memory of him, but more in the sense of a playful memory of him playing with me. But other than that, I have no other connection to him because he passed at an early age, of my
Mhm.
early age. But my godmother, who I was fortunate to be able to get close to my teenage years, I also lived with her. And the reason why is because when she married at the age of 21, now she was born in 1904.
Wow.
So when I got to know my godmother, she was already in her 60s, moving toward her 70s in life. But she was godmother to many in the family because they adopted her, because her husband abandoned her. About 2 weeks after they were married, she never ever would see him again. Now, to this day, all my aunts and uncles are now passed that would have any memory, but my mother would say that no one really knew what happened. So she was alone,
Mhm.
but there was such a love within the family and she had such a deep faith. I mean, we were raised next door to the church,
Mhm.
so the church was very much center in our lives, and very much for her as well. It was very rich in her life, and so I was fortunate to literally live with her. And
Mhm.
my dad, who worked on riverboats, was gone long stints of time. So when he would be gone, my mother and I and my brother would go and stay with my godmother.
Oh,
We lived
wow.
with her,
Yeah.
and then when Dad would come home, I would still stay. And so I was raised by her in many ways, and that's where I learned my prayers because we prayed every day. She would sing. She devoted herself, to passing on the faith.
Mhm.
Daily mass was part of the journey, and praying the rosary, and singing hymns, and she would always pray with me before going to bed. It was a richness, and it wasn't not something that she just did. You can
Mhm.
tell my memory of her is that it was something she believed,
Mhm.
and she passed it on to me. And there's no doubt there's a lot of her in me that unfortunately it ended too early.
Yeah.
And when she passed, but she touched so many lives. She was my mother's godmother. She was some of my
Oh,
aunts, my mother's
really?
sister's godmother. There's many of them in the family, and they even called her nanny, even though
Mhm.
she wasn't their nanny. But
Mhm.
because she just was that kind of person.
So she wasn't related to you at all?
No, she was my great aunt.
Okay, you might have said that. I just missed
Yeah, no,
what
it's
the
okay. Yeah,
connection
she
was.
was my mother's sister,
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
so she was a great aunt,
Yeah.
actually, and but just a beautiful soul. And what I think about when I do think of her, and I know that when I would speak to young couples
Mhm.
preparing for birth and thinking about
Mhm.
baptism and considering godparents, I would
Mhm.
always make reference to her, to say, what is the role of a godmother? And
Mhm.
it really is our godfather is to stand with. And there's a duty and obligation to that as well. It's not just a piece of paper and you get a little certificate and a picture, and you get to be called nanny or père, whatever in French or whatever the terminology may be for many people. It really is an obligation to accompany this soul through the walk of life and to help
Mhm.
them reach eternal life.
Yeah.
And to do that with the parents. And the parents, by asking, is also entrusting. And by that entrustment, they're also giving permission
Mhm.
that I need your help. Also, when it comes to affirmation, but also fraternal correction. And so I
Mm.
always would warn parents before you ask anyone, remember that you're asking them to be a parent. You're asking them to share in your duty and responsibility. So if you don't do your role right, it's their obligation to correct you.
Wow.
And if you don't want that, then maybe you don't want that person. And so it's really understanding roles, duties, obligations, and why? Because there's a soul involved.
Mhm.
There's a value here that is more precious than anything in this world, and you have a chance to walk with that soul. And so it's very similar to what we began our conversation with. Walking, standing, holding that person in your heart and doing everything you can to support that life
Mhm.
and saying that you're not alone and I'm here with you. And I know, just kind of backtrack to that talk, I actually know many of working in the pregnancy and working, I should say, don't take my word back, serving in the pregnancy care centers are godparents to several of those babies they've saved, helped
Oh.
save. Why? Because the parents see in them, you were with me from the beginning. I
Mhm.
would love for you to serve if you're willing to be the godfather, the godmother of my child. So I know many people who serve in that capacity.
That's beautiful. What exactly does the church teach about godparents? You said before we started this that you actually only need one sponsor, I believe, within the church. Like, what are the parameters that a priest would give parents who are looking to choose a godparent for
Right.
their child?
So in French culture, especially in
Hmm.
southern Louisiana, and in many parts of our country,
Hmm.
and actually around the world, I mean, having a godmother and a godfather is very, very common. So but in a sense, what the church expects is that there be a sponsor.
Okay.
So a godfather or a godmother, if one is choosing to have both two, a godfather and a godmother. And so there's a qualification for that.
Hmm.
And that is, it has to be a Catholic, who is in good standing. So what does that mean? Now, by good standing, so when I would meet with couples, I would explain very much the life of my godmother. So a person who is in good standing is a person who is not only, quote, checking the boxes, baptized, confirmed, going to mass, practicing their faith. Yes, absolutely. That's all a requisite. But living their faith. You want someone who not only is being faithful to the commitment they themselves have made to
Hmm.
practice the faith, to live the faith, and to make and live in the light of the church's teaching. If they're married, to be validly married. If they're single, to be living a chaste, pure life. If they're if whatever their state in life may be, because they don't have to be a certain age. In a
Hmm.
sense, they have to be at least of confirmation. In some dioceses, they require it.
Hmm.
Some bishops, may give permission for them to be dispensed from that, because they're going to be confirmed in a month or maybe within
Hmm.
6 months or so. But these are very important, because what you're saying to the person you're asking is what I shared a little earlier, and that is that you're entrusting them with equal responsibility. Now, equal, you're not the parents, you're not mom and dad, but by
Hmm.
being godmother, mother, godfather, father, you are a parent to this child.
Hmm.
And you're being asked to be a parent to this child,
Hmm.
which means you are going to be held accountable for being a parent for this child. Yes, mom and dad who have begotten the child are the primary educators and have the dual responsibility and obligation, and will be judged and held accountable for what they did and did not do.
Hmm.
Yes, but godparents will be held as also responsible for the level to which they had influence.
So if you have a set of parents that are practicing the faith and they're raising their child in the faith, and does that mean that the godparent isn't going to be necessarily as involved or have as much responsibility on their shoulders, or are they still supposed to be actively involved in helping raise that child?
Absolutely, it's
So they're not like backup parents.
no, 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 and that's important. And maybe, I don't, if I give that impression, let me back out of that for a moment.
I don't think you did. I just wanted to clarify that because I was curious.
My godmother saw her role very clearly, and that is she is in a sense kind of a co-sponsor with mom and dad. That
Okay.
she is standing and stood with them, not to take their role away,
Hmm.
but to support their role, but also recognize the uniqueness of her own role and that she played. And so, in a sense, it's a partnership
Hmm.
that begins to enter into with a single soul involved. And so, literally, four people in most cases, godfather, godmother, with mom and dad, standing in solidarity and sharing their gifts and their skills and all their abilities to nurture, to sustain, to cultivate, to
Hmm.
build, this wonderful soul in the light of the gospel, and to be a faithful disciple and to reach eternal life. So, and that's why, sadly today, so many godparents, are not as involved in the life of the child, the teenager, the young adult. And I have to be honest, I mean, sadly, I have been asked to serve as a godfather, and I am.
Hmm.
But it's been very hard on me, because I take my roles very seriously. But because of the life I live and the life that I have and the ministry that I serve, I'm not visible. I'm not present. I'm not home. I'm
Hmm.
not able to be there for weddings and other events, and that's why I don't take them too easily now.
Hmm.
And because I really believe that my role is so important to be visible, not every day. I mean,
Hmm.
that's mom and dad's role. That's grandpa and grandma's role. But to be a godparent really is to take that role seriously and to engage. And it does. It bothers my spirit that I have not been as able to do, what I believe that I would tell everybody else to be doing. And that's why I've kind of backed off. I would not tell anyone no, but I would really sit down with them and explain that my role would be very different and be honest with them. I'm thankful for the opportunity and I'm happy to help. But I take this very serious because I see the importance of it and what it conveys to a child to know their godmother and their godfather and to be with them throughout life and to be present when if they're called to married life, to be there when they're getting married, to be there when their first baby comes along. This is my godmother, this is my godfather. To be part of the life and not just a birthday card or just when holidays come along. And again, life is busy, life is full. But to see how the church looks at this is rich. It's not just a matter, of fulfilling an obligation that a couple has when they present their child for baptism. You have to have a sponsor. Similar to weddings, you need witnesses, people who see and are there, but they serve differently than a sponsor for a baptism. And even the sponsor for confirmation has a very unique role, right? So, but at baptism, that role is very, very precious, and it's one that we need to take seriously if we're being asked. And for many times it's I'm asking my sister, I'm asking my brother, and it's an honor. It really is. But to really pause and say, okay, it's more than that. I'm asking more of you than that. And also, and I know you have some other questions about it. So,
this is good.
But I would say that it's also to be able. I know that the one gift that I can give to my godchildren is to pray for them.
Yeah.
I can pray for them daily, and I do. I think of them. I remember them on their birthdays, and I try to remember special days in their lives. And as a priest, I can pray mass for them. But as any godparent, I can do penance on their behalf. I can do sacrifices on their behalf. I can unite myself with them in prayer. I mean, I can do so many things that because I'm not physically present, but I still can be united to them.
So actually I was about to ask, what are some specific things that godparents can do and should do for their godchildren? Or I guess, what are some things that they're obligated to do? Like, is there anything, obviously being there with the child, but is there anything specific they're obligated to do? And then what are some just best practices?
So it's, as I mentioned earlier, so that if you're going to step into this role and in this relationship, is to see it that there's an ultimate goal, there's an ultimate end, and that is not only your own soul in need of being saved, but the fact that you want this child to know, love, and serve and be with God into eternal life. So you will exhaust yourself to help aid this child, one day an adult, into that life. And so it changes as life changes, as ages change. And so as their lives begin to unfold, the need changes. And so, but the most important is to witness. So and not only being present, being visible, being a part of, but also the fact of really being a witness, a model to them. So again, mom and dad, primary teachers, primary educator, primary model, all of the primary that can never be given away, can be shared, but never to be taken away from them. The godparent helps them by also witnessing and to also be an example to the child. So my memory of my godmother, is, never heard her speak a foul word. God knows I gave her many opportunities probably as a child to frustrate her and everything else. But my memory of her and my experience of her was kindness, gentleness, a caring spirit, a thoughtfulness, an attentiveness. And those values she modeled. And also humility. She accepted the state of her life. I never heard her complain. I didn't hear any of my extended family ever speak of her ever complaining. She lived a simple life. She had not much means of life, but and she lived comfortably, but didn't have very much in life compared to what other people may have had. Never heard her complain about it. She accepted that cross of life, and that is something she modeled to me. And little did she know, unless she had an inside kind of path, that one day that this boy that she was helping to raise and to love and to care for, that would be called to the vocation of priesthood. Unless she had an inside scoop, she didn't know that, but she was shaping that. And so that's the role of a godparent, is kind of the shape. Think of that you have an opportunity to shape the clay, to mold that life. And that to me is what's important. That's why I go back to parents. So if you're going to ask me to do that, be prepared, because I'm going to do it. And so with you or without you. And that is, so it's important for the godparent to see that when they're with the child or with the young adult, or even later in life as adults, constantly witness the faith. And to show them that this is the path. I mean, my godmother, of course, I went to mass with pretty much every Sunday, along with my parents, my grandparents. We were all in the same pews around the same area. So you saw with your own eyes that it wasn't just something that they were just doing. It was something rich and something beautiful and something important to them in the messiness of life and in the difficulties of life. But that was a richness to them. And I can point out many great aunts and great uncles that set that tone, who acted like godparents in most ways. They really, I mean, I can think of my Aunt Louise, I can think of my Aunt Sylvia, I mean, I can think of a litany of them. And all of them had an impact. So godparents are very, and family are just so important.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. I mean, obviously the church wouldn't ask us to have a godparent if it weren't important. Can you have a godparent who isn't Catholic?
So the first requirement is that sponsor. So
Yes.
In this case, if it's one, godmother, a godfather. So if you have a second person that you would like to consider,
So your sponsor has to be Catholic.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
But then if you want to do, like, if you have a Catholic godmother and you want to have someone.
So if you asking because you're let's just say that it was your best man at your wedding, and he's not Catholic, but you would asking his wife to be the godmother, in this situation. So, but she's not Catholic. So could she serve?
But you just said they're both not Catholic.
Well, the idea was just say one has to be Catholic.
Okay.
One has to be Catholic. And so, I'm just using an example that it was your best man at your wedding, and you want to ask his wife, but they're not Catholic.
Okay.
So here, which you could have a Christian witness. But still, there are some similarities here. Is their marriage valid? Are they living their Christian faith? How are they living that faith? These are questions that should be asked of them, and not just from a piece of paper, that they sign and get signed by someone else. That's important, and that could be done as a way of testifying, having an affidavit, if you will. But, a letter from their pastor. Francine is a fantastic, faithful, committed to her faith community here. She volunteers. I mean, something that testifies, just like we do on the other side, in the sense of having someone, well, tell me about yourself, And so just as the Catholic has certain requisites that have to be fulfilled and visible, so should the Christian witness in this case. Now, whether you call them nanny, parent, godfather, the church doesn't really get into that. I mean, in French culture, nanny is just that, and she's your godmother. Parent is your godfather. But other people have different names. So, but in this situation, you would have a godfather who's Catholic, and all right, and then you would call her a godmother, but she have a Christian witness.
Okay. That
is serving in this capacity of helping this child.
And they have to be Christian. You couldn't have someone who's not baptized at all in this position?
No.
Okay.
So the thing that challenges that I would say and caution, for any of our listeners that may be at that stage of life and thinking about the baptism of their child, and that as beautiful as Francine, as I just gave an example of,
hypothetical Francine
would be, and all the beautiful things that are said of her, there will be some difficulties because Francine will not be able to share fully and completely in the life of the child, because will not understand what is Holy Communion, what is confession. There will be some complexities and difficulties of articulation of what we as Catholics believe and hold in advance that Francine, may not know, will not know. She's not going to be against it, but she may not be able to help the child, to prepare for the sacraments and prepare for other things. So I really caution families to think, deeply, especially as I've been explaining, that looking at their role, understanding their role, their contribution, their partnership. So not just because they're the best friend, not just because they're someone dear and beautiful and wonderful. That's all true.
It's not just a nice title.
Right. It has a level of obligation and duty, and justice to the child has to be rendered. And
Now, in the case of a Francine who is a Christian witness, do you think there's potential confusion for the child if you call them, like the Catholic one Godfather and the Christian witness Godmother, of this idea of, well, they're different religions, so either religion is a valid choice?
I would say that just kind of gets people kind of a little confused, because then all of a sudden, you kind of focus in on a title, on a name.
Okay.
But there is a richness in the name. There is a richness in being called a godmother. God is the first word, first part of that word. So there is something there that is rich. So Francine obviously believes in the one true God. She has a depth of faith, our hypothetical, Francine. But there comes a part where it doesn't move any further, because there's not an understanding of the fullness and the richness of the one true church. And so that begins now, could potentially cause some difficulty, especially when the child reaches out and says, I'm preparing for my first confession, and have you gone through that, Aunt Francine? Or if she's an aunt or cousin or whatever name they're going to give. But for that's why I wanted to say caution parents, as they're making their considerations. And if they have a difficulty, then one godparent is perfectly fine. In other words, if they're maybe not agreeing, sometimes that is the case, because sadly today, many family members, friends are not practicing their faith. And parents who are trying to do the right thing, want to do the right thing, the pool of choices. And that's why you'll see, when I was in parish ministry, sometimes you see, weren't you godmother for the previous child? Yes, I'm godmother again, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But it's like, and you'll hear them say, there's not a lot of sadly in our family pool that we would want to entrust our child to.
So it's better to have one good godparent than one good godparent and someone else who's iffy. Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
Yep.
What should godparents
That's what
do
I would say.
in a situation where I guess it doesn't matter whether or not the child is practicing the faith. The parents aren't. What's the role of the godparents if the parents of the child aren't actually practicing the faith? They get their child baptized, they choose someone who is faithful as the godparent, but the parents actually either fall away from the faith or stop practicing or never really were doing it strongly to begin with.
So obviously the first role of the deacon or the pastor, the priest, or it could even be a lay person that maybe is the first initial contact in working with a couple, is really to engage that conversation. Why do you want your child to be baptized? And just really initiate a conversation, especially if you don't know them. If you have no familiarity. I mean, you sit in the church for all the masses, who's there, not there, as a priest and especially as the pastor. And so why do you want your child baptized? Well, I was baptized and my husband was baptized, and beautiful, wonderful. Do you practice the faith? I haven't seen you here. In other words, to have an honest, not trying to dissuade them, not trying to discourage them, but you're also trying to be honest with them and just encourage them to realize that you are the first teacher. You are the primary model. And that means that you today, by approaching the church, are saying that we want the life that we live for our child. You're speaking for your child when your child at this moment is not able to speak. But you are bringing your child to receive life from Christ through baptism and to live that life and to move forward in that life and to know him in this life and in the life to come. And if you yourself are not practicing that, then what's the hope of the child being raised in that light? That's a first question that needs to be broached. And if it's not, then what happens is what we see so much today is we have tremendous amounts of baptized people. Praise God for the baptism, but there's nothing beyond it. It's so we have to ensure and help the couple to see the importance of what they're doing, which then can help them to help guide them not just on the criteria which need to be followed, absolutely, but also to think deeply. What person would you want influencing your child, supporting you along that way? And it gets them to think, and to help them. And sometimes I can say this, and I would throw it back to you, is that sometimes I've had to call sister, over, or someone in the parish and say, I need a sponsor for this child because the family has no one. They're not from here, or maybe and so I need you to be a godmother. And so and again, knowing the seriousness is I can do that, you know.
So to clarify, that's a good answer of before the child's baptized, what you can do. I was talking more about listeners who might be godparents to children where the parents aren't practicing the faith. What can they do in their role as godparent?
Right.
What do you do when the parents of this child aren't raising their child in the faith and you're the godparent and you are faithful and you want to help?
Right. So use myself as an example.
Okay.
So because I'm a godfather, I have some that are not practicing their faith. So what is my role? My role there is not to be a nag in the sense of constantly, beating, though not a bad idea sometimes in a very loving, firm way. But to take every moment that I have. When I'm put in those moments, it's not the child's fault.
Yeah.
Okay, especially when they're children or even in young adolescents. But as they start aging, that's a little different conversation so that I can have with them. But when they're now fully dependent upon mom and dad, it's not the child that needs to be the one addressed as much as it is the parents. Now, I will address both, but I'll tell you how. The parents one is purely to remind them of the duty and obligation that they made when they promised to raise their children. When they made that, they stood in the presence of God, in the midst of His church, and promised that they would raise their children and they would help them to live the faith. And so, by not doing this, you are not fulfilling the obligation you made. And so this is unfair to you because you're not living the life that you're called to live, but it's also unjust to your child. Now, on the child's part, well, many times what you have to do is when you're with them, you teach them their prayers. You work with them. You help them. And sometimes maybe as a godparent, if you happen to live nearby, how about you come spend, the night at Parent's house with your cousins and so forth, whatever, and you bring them to church with you. You intervene where you can. You make inroads where you can. Be creative. Have a pizza night on Saturday night, and guess what? Just stay the night. We'll go to church tomorrow, and I'll bring you home afterward. You find ways, to engage. My godmother didn't have to deal with those obstacles, but she took her role seriously, praying, spending time with, teaching in the prayers. What did the prayers mean? I remember me asking her questions. It was so fun and I think back today of probably those crazy questions I asked her about purgatory or about the saints, and I don't remember all her answers, but I remember she did answer. I do remember she responded. And so, this is what a godparent does too, and to encourage, but not to blame the child, and or in a sense of make the child feel guilty for what they don't have any power over.
How can you do that without becoming a wedge between the parent and the child, without making the parents feel like you're undermining their authority?
And I think by reminding the parents, you asked me to be in this relationship, and and you can't undo it. You can't uninvite me, all right? You can't take me off your Facebook account. You can't you can't just erase me. You can prevent me in many ways. That's true. But you asked me to do this. And I think godparents need to be firm in love with the parents. You asked me. The same way I would say to a parent, if a godparent is not living rightly, their role is to correct the godparent. You made a promise to help us. You're working against us. You're not assisting. Your example is a poor example, no matter what the circumstances may be. The idea is you made an obligation to this child. And I think why? And I think that's where the focus has to be. To the child, adolescent, even young adult. Adult. Just because they become an adult doesn't mean you stop being a parent or a godparent. It changes into something more beautiful, something different. But your obligations remain the same. So godparent can always go, hey, Frank, what's up, bub? I understand that, this is going on in your life. This is not right for you. This is a Christian. Finding a way to have a conversation, whether that's over tacos at the Mexican restaurant, over a beer at home watching a football game, wherever it is, you find a way. But if you're living that faith, you can't contain it. You can't help but talk about it because you love them. I mean, that would be really, just it goes against the scripture. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, you don't light a lamp and hide it.
Yeah.
So you put it where it can, but at the same time, you don't come with a billy club and beat them, because you make no inroads with that.
Mm-hmm.
It really is in the witnessing. And all you have to do, and you know this as well as I, Colleen, you sit down with family and friends and you hear people talk about other people who've been such good role models. And what draws people in is the role model. It's the example. They remember, and even though they may not be where they need to be, their conscience is still there, maybe dormant, maybe buried, but it's there. And they remember their grandmother, their godmother, their godfather. If they were really people that exemplified and lived their life in faith and lived the virtues that we're all called to live, it's inspiring them. Even though they may not be able to live it themselves in this moment, for whatever reason they've convinced themselves, but that light is still shining. And so that is what we have to be. And then we can draw people in. You draw them in.
Ultimately, I think that's what attracts people to the faith. Like, yes, it is important, obviously, to speak the truth about all the issues that we do here on the show, but it's also important that that comes hand in hand with living a virtuous lifestyle, one that's attractive to other people, one that treats other people like the child of God that they are, and recognizes that each person was made in God's image and likeness. Because that's how you're not necessarily going to win people over by giving a good logical argument for something, but you win them over by being that example, that Christian witness. I was thinking about this a lot with the Harrison Butker speech, which went viral.
Right.
Obviously, he said a lot of really great things in the speech. And there was a lot of, talking about it online in all sorts of different circles. And what really struck me was when his teammates, I think it was Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, both spoke about the speech. And they both basically said, I don't agree with most of what he said. But neither one of them would talk badly about his character. Both said that he, I think it was Mahomes was saying he shows up every day to practice. I judge a guy based on what he brings to the field every day. And it was so interesting to me to look at. Butker was saying things that are incredibly countercultural, like things that most people who buy into the world's ideology are not going to agree with. Right. And yet these two NFL players, while saying that they didn't agree with Butker, were saying, I can't trash his character. I know he loves his wife and kids, and he has a right to say what he's saying, even if I don't agree with what he's saying. And that's how we have to be to the world. We have to be the type of people that when we speak the truth, people who know us can't say they're a hateful person. They might not agree with what we're saying, but if we're really bringing to the table every day that love, that virtue, that respect for everybody else in a healthy way, in a channeled through virtue way, that type of respect where I see you as someone that God created and I'm going to treat you that way, then the words that we speak are going to ultimately mean more, because people will know that we mean them and also know that we aren't these hateful, radical individuals.
Right. And through his speech, truth was being proclaimed. So word was being spoken.
Yes.
And teaching was being proclaimed. But he was also witnessing to the integrity of his own life, in his own weaknesses, in his own shortcomings, knowing them well. But truth still prevails.
Exactly.
Right is right, and beauty is beauty, and what is good is good, and that takes great courage, and that's why in this situation, like we started our conversation with pregnancy care centers, or just talking about them, and you look at the witness that people give there, because the first entry point is need, is care, but from that point forward, that care begins to be seen in an individual or in a team of individuals that are intervening, and what's their kindness and their gentleness and their firmness, and then eventually the correctiveness, the fraternal correction, the guidance, pointing them in another direction. All that begins to come to the surface, and it's a both and.
Yes, definitely.
But the first part, like you just said beautifully, really is when people think of people. In most cases, what they remember are encounters. They remember conversations, or they remember an example. One, for example, dear friends of mine driving on interstate out of the city of New Orleans encountered an accident, and a young woman died in their arms. They stood there until some help came. She didn't die alone. So what does the family remember? After everything unfolded, what they remember is two people who took time to stop.
Yeah, the Good Samaritans of the world.
Didn't ask them if they were Catholic, didn't ask them if they were Christian, didn't ask if they were Jewish, didn't ask. Just two people who stood. And that's important as we look at this. Is what we need are witnesses. Pope Paul VI talked about this, and oftentimes gets a little misquoted in it. And he said we don't need more teaching. And obviously he was not debunking teaching and the teaching of the church, but he said we need witnesses. Mm-hmm. And it's a powerful teaching. Mm-hmm. And it's not one or the other. Mm-mm. It's a both and. And so, but it's the first entry for most cases. Sometimes it is a homily someone heard. Sometimes it is a speech like the Boquet we're talking about that someone heard. Oh, wow, wait a minute. And they think, mm-hmm. and it provokes them to think, oh, wow. So yes, mm-hmm. that's why it's a both and.
Well, and I wasn't trying to say that he shouldn't have given the speech at all. Right. It was more that he was more likely to be heard because even these people who would probably that say that they disagree with him were still willing to say that he was a good man and that he was authentic and he was saying things he really believed, and it wasn't like they would not trash his character because they knew his character, even if they didn't necessarily agree. And that means that you're opening up the door for people to be able to hear it later. If you have a terrible character and you're saying these things, people are just going to dismiss all of it.
Completely shut you down. Right.
But if you have that good character and you show up every day and you are that person that people can rely on and they know that you
on and off field.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So and I think that's when godparents see that role is that, so when I'm in the company of my godchild, mm-hmm. And I would say this, even if one is not living where they need to be, mm-hmm. in other words, because of human weakness, is still to be mindful. When I'm in the presence of my godchild, mm-hmm. I'm going to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to say the right thing. I'm going to be kind. In other words, put the effort in and realize is that there is a beauty here that you are called to serve. Mm-hmm. And whether you're where you need to be perfectly, well, get off the laurels and correct it. But because I'm very mindful when I'm in people's company, I'm very mindful of what I say. I'm mindful, and again, that's continued growth. That's my own prayer life. It's growing in the Lord. It's being mindful that anything I do affects other people, mm-hmm. good or bad. So it's mindful that, especially when I'm held accountable for this particular soul, to be even more mindful that of how I act and what I do. So godparents have a very, very important role, and parents need to be more attentive to who they choose, mindful, very intentional of who they choose, and the godparent needs to be honest and say, I'm honored, but I'm not sure that I'm the one that you would need at this time. Mm-hmm. And it could be because they're not where they need to be. Mm-hmm. And as a pastor and as a priest, what was so difficult at times, Colleen, is when they presented candidates and you had to tell them no. Yeah. And it's because they don't know. No one's ever spoke to them about it. Well, so-and-so is a godfather for so-and-so. I can't answer for that moment and why permission might have been given. Should it have been given? That's a whole other question. Mm-hmm. But this is what the church teaches, what she says of the role, and this is what must be fulfilled. With that, let's talk about the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So we need to recognize how difficult it is for priests too, mm-hmm. when they have to say in a situation, the candidates you present are not candidates. Mm-hmm. They're not. They're just, and that's, so this is a serious gift that we're talking about here. Yeah. That one brings and one receives. And so I would just say that, it's, as parents are considering and praying, as godparents are dealing today. I mean, I can tell you just recently, a godparent reached out to me that I've known for numbers of years because they were asking something similar that you asked. Mm-hmm. Their godchild has not had their children baptized. Mm. And so they're saying, what do I do? And in a sense, they know what they need to do. And they said, but if I push too hard, I may push them away. It's all prudential judgment in many ways when you mm-hmm. enter these moments. But to say nothing allows it to stay where it is. Fear just prevents someone from doing what they know they need to be doing. But honesty and finding a way in, finding that moment. I mean, I do it in my own unique way, and people have to do the same thing.
Well, thank you so much, Father. This has been a really good conversation. I honestly didn't know a ton about, I kind of knew instinctively what the church says about godparents, but I didn't know actually what everything that was going into it, so that we've been talking about. So this has been really great. So thank you.
Very much, Colleen. Look forward to the next time.
I look forward to it too, Father, when you're back from all your mission trips. Maybe next year.
Hopefully before then.
And to all of our listeners, please like, follow, subscribe. I'm going to put some new ebooks on the end screen that you can check out, and I'll put a link in the description where you can give to our matching gift campaign. And keep on living the culture of life. I'll see you next Thursday. God bless.